with is electronic meeting decisions and trying to make sure that your congregation is up to date with electronic meeting discussions. So has your congregation met virtually or electronically during COVID? If it has, there are some things you need to do. If it hasn't, if you've never had an electronic session meeting, or you've never had an electronic congregational meeting, and by electronic, I mean either by Zoom like we're using, or I mean by telephone, that's also electronic, right? If you haven't had that, then you don't need to do this step. If you have, you need to look in your bylaws now in front of you and see if your bylaws have provisions for electronic meetings, right? Are they there? And let me ask you a second question that goes with that. If they are, were they there before we asked church buildings to close down before COVID? Or were they added later? All right. If they were there before early 2020, when we had to begin to go virtual for some things, then you're all set. All right. There's absolutely no problem if they were there. If they weren't there before that, or they're not there now, and you've had an electronic meeting of any type, there are certain things that you as clerk have to do. And that's what I want to go over. All right. You're going to, first of all, need to keep track. You're going to have to make a list for yourself of all of the decisions. You hear what I say? Not everything you've done over the last year and a half, but any actions you took as a session or any actions you took as a congregation. You're going to make a list of what those are. We passed the following 5 motions over 2020 and early 2021, let's say, in the session, and we didn't have provisions in our bylaws for electronic meetings. Or we had a congregational meeting and we elected new ruling elders and teaching elders and new ruling elders and deacons. And we set up a nominating committee and whatever else you've done, all right? If you've done those things, you need to keep a list of them. Then you're going to do what's called ratification. Ratification is an idea, it's a motion that you're going to make the next time you're back face to face, all right, with your session or face to face with your congregation. And it's going to make the actions you've already taken valid. Okay. Until you do that, it's not legally valid. All right, you may be acting on them, but it's not legally valid. It has to be approved by the same body, so here the session or the congregation, at a later meeting that meets your bylaw requirements. All right. So if you didn't have a provision for meeting electronically, the only way you will meet your bylaw requirements is by what we used to call a meeting, a face-to-face meeting, right? The way we used to meet as clerks, face-to-face. You need to have at least one meeting of that kind in order to meet your requirements. And you're at that point, you're going to ratify all the actions that you've taken, all right? You can only ratify what we call proper actions. What that means is the congregation can't act upon and ratify something that it couldn't have done if it was meeting face-to-face, all right? So you can't, for instance, if your bylaws say that something has to have a poll vote, a ballot vote, right? And you voted instead by sticking up your hands. That's not a proper action. It can't be ratified. But any proper action you took, you can ratify. So you'll make a list of what those actions are. You're going to keep a list of all the motions that you've taken in that way, all right? And the next time you have a face-to-face session meeting with the quorum required, you'll make a motion. You'll say, I have 15 actions. I have 3 actions, whatever it is, that we did electronically. And you can summarize them. You don't need to read them in great detail unless somebody on your session requires you to. But you will say, we voted to set up a nominating committee, and we voted to change the budget in this way, and we voted to give the pastor a raise, whatever it is, all right? And you will then say, I move that we ratify those actions. Session will vote, Hopefully you'll get a majority, right? And you will then have put down all those actions were ratified on that date. That will show up in your minutes. The next,
Susan,
yes,
Heather has a question.
sure, Heather.
If we did a hybrid meeting, we have to do this also, I'm guessing?
Yes, unless you have provisions for a hybrid meeting in your bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
Also
And-
have a question in the chat, Susan. If our bylaws don't specify the need for in-person meetings, why would the electronic meeting need ratification?
Because we work under Robert's Rules of Order, and Robert's Rule says the default is a face-to-face meeting, and that you have to have provisions in order to have an electronic meeting. So if your bylaws don't say anything, you must ratify the decisions. But I mean, the other thing you'll notice is at the bottom of the slide that I have up, at the next time you have a congregational meeting that's face-to-face, also put in provisions in your bylaws for electronic or virtual meetings. You can use, if you're looking for a model of that and you go to the Presbytery website, our bylaws as a presbytery have a provision for electronic meetings. And you can just copy and paste those, change presbytery to the name of your congregation and stick them in. And ask,
Susan, Donna has a question.
Hi, Susan. Donna Restainer from Marlborough. I do remember when we had our other clerk of session day that we talked about bylaws, and we did not at that time put that provision in our bylaws for electronic meetings, but we have been at the beginning of every meeting making a motion that we can meet electronically.
But unless you have that provision in your bylaws, it doesn't matter.
So so that's not covering us.
Ratify. It shouldn't be a big deal. I don't, what I want you to do is have it so that if anybody questions any of those motions, they're valid motions. By ratification, you're making them valid. But if these are motions your congregation was for or your session were for, it shouldn't be a big deal to ratify them. It should take, the biggest deal is going to be to explain to your session what ratification is, right? Because they're going to say, why are we doing this? And you're going to have to say to them, because we didn't have this provision in our bylaws, we have to ratify the decisions that we made earlier. But it should be a 3-minute, 4-minute action. But again,
Susan,
put in the future, put these in your bylaws at your next face-to-face congregational meeting, because the odds are good that there will be times that we're going to need electronic meetings in the future. We've already been told by different scientists that COVID is not an anomaly, right? That there will be times we will have viruses back again. And we may need to go back into an electronic meeting 1 month. So put it in, so you're covered. Yeah, go ahead.
just to clarify, in the chat, it was asked that, so the next in-person congregational meeting is when this change happens?
For the bylaw change, it would be the next in-person congregational meeting. For the votes that you've taken, it will be in whichever group you took the vote. So if you voted by session electronically, it would be in your next face-to-face session meeting you would ratify. If you voted in a congregational meeting electronically, it would be at your next congregational meeting that you would ratify.
Deborah Fowl has a question.
I did.
Hi, so this covers an extensive period of time. What happens if the elders decided that although they voted for something, they've changed their mind and now they're not going to vote for it? They're not going to ratify it, and you've already taken the action.
Hopefully that will come up is the first.
Yeah, hopefully, but
Hopefully that won't come up. If it does, then you haven't ratified that action at that point, and you and I will talk about what the specific action is, because there are several different choices depending on what the action is of how you could respond to it. If you sold a piece of property, you've got one set of options. Yeah. If you've made a decision about a salary or about when the meeting is going to happen on a month, you've got another set of options. So let's wait and see what it is.
okay.
Hopefully the ratification, though, these are decisions that, if it were me, I would say you all voted on these. We're just affirming them so I can put them in the minutes in this way. So,
Patricia has her hand up.
hi, Patricia.
Hi, how is everybody today?
Yeah.
Now with the same, along the same vein, if we're not we're ratifying the votes that were already taken.
Correct.
So we're not asking for another vote. So that would that like
For
take
one
care of,
vote. You're asking for one vote. You're
right?
saying-
So with
Right.
the other question that was asked, you're not voting on it again, so you're not taking a vote. So it wouldn't even, like, you're
Right,
not
but
questioning the
somebody-
vote that they already took, so they wouldn't really have anything to challenge, right?
I think what Deb was suggesting is, let's say you voted to give the secretary a raise, and now somebody's saying, well, I don't think that he or she should have a raise, right? I'm not
Right.
going to ratify that decision. And then the question is, what do you do? If the majority refuses to ratify the decision?
Okay.
They're not new decisions. This is not new decision. This is
Yeah.
for decisions you've already made.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, then the next thing I want to talk about are manses. So New York State, first thing I want to talk about.
Susan,
Yes.
before you get in there, we have one more in the chat. Does the ratification need to be listed on the call for the congregational meeting?
Yes. Yes, it's one of the pieces of business you will be doing there.
Janine has her hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, we've had our bylaws amended in October of 2020 to include virtual meetings and things like that.
How did you amend them? Did you amend them in a face-to-face meeting? Or did you amend them on a virtual meeting?
Virtual.
Then you still have to ratify that decision.
Okay.
It has to be, you can only add a virtual option in a face-to-face meeting initially. Okay, so you had to be face-to-face when you make that decision. So you're going to ratify that as part of your congregational meeting, next congregational meeting.
Thank you.
Sure. So I want to next talk about manses for a minute. I know a lot of congregations don't have manses, so if you don't, you can sort of tune this out, although you have other buildings, so you may want to pay attention to some of this. New York State law understands, first of all, that a manse is a piece of church-owned property that is, this is a quote now, the residence of the officiating clergy. What that means is you're a clergy person, all right? You're a pastor. If you have a manse, your congregation has to attest to the fact that that's how it's being used each year when you fill out that form that I've given you the number for New York. Each year you must attest to that. If somebody else is in your manse, you technically can't attest to that, right? Because that person is not your officiating clergy person. What can you do? You should be putting that manse, therefore, back on the tax rolls and paying tax on the income that you're getting for somebody being in that manse, right? If you have another clergy person, does that help? Nope, not unless they're your officiating clergy person. So don't tell me, gee, well, so my pastor didn't want to live in the manse, so I found the Episcopal priest and they didn't have any place to live. I put them in the manse instead. They're not your officiating pastor. So you haven't still met the requirements that New York State has for what a manse is.
Susan, we have a question. Where do you find the RP 462 form?
It's a form that New York State requires each year. It's usually mailed to your church. It's usually a one-page, well, two-sided, one-page form in which you're filling in blanks. Has anything changed on this? Who is the name of your officiating clergy person? Are they seminary trained? Are they a member of what denomination? It asks forms, but one of them is, has anything changed? And if you've moved somebody other than a clergy person into your manse, something has changed. And when you put yes, and it's going to ask you what it is, you need to put down that you're now renting that or having it used in some other way. This doesn't mean you can't use your manse instead for other church activities. If you've decided you're not renting your manse and you don't have it used as a residence of the officiating clergy, but you're using it as let's say, your fellowship hour gathering place instead, and that's the only way you're using it, then you're still within the guidelines of it being a piece of church property used as a church piece of property instead of a residence. You're going to switch it from manse to other church property at that point, right? But you would still be able to keep it off the tax rolls if you're doing that. But if you're renting it out, technically you need to put it on the tax rolls. The second thing is, you'll notice I have manse condition. And this is what I said, even if you don't have a manse, you have other church buildings. And so you may want to pay attention to this. We've had, in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, we've had a series of problems that have come up around the conditions of manses. We've had to have pastors move out while the problems have been corrected, all right? And this can be anything from radon in the building to lead paint in some of our older manses, to other forms of other problems where there are leaks, to other problems where there's mold and mildew. It's your responsibility, if you have a manse, to keep it up, all right? It is a church investment, and the same way you would keep up any of the other investments you have and make sure that they're keeping value, it's your responsibility to keep this value up. Now, I'm aware, I've heard enough pastors say this, that they really don't want the session traipsing through their home every month or two to see the conditions, and I get that. But it's not unreasonable to say to a pastor, we will have our property committee walk through your manse once a year or twice a year to see the condition of the manse, all right? So that you know what needs to be fixed. It's better than waiting till your pastor who's been there for 10 years suddenly leaves, and now you find out that the refrigerator has no door on it, and the sink has been leaking, and you have a mess of mold in the basement because of that. And you need to be regularly in there. In the ideal world, the whole session would be aware of the condition of the manse so that you can budget for this on a regular basis. Okay? If you can't budget for this, this is why congregations, among other things, have endowments, is for problems that come up in manses. But if you're uncomfortable, you can't budget for this, you need to decide whether you really should be keeping the manse or offering a pastor a housing allowance. All right. As help for this, the Presbytery's Property Committee is happy to do one of two things. It can refer you to an outside inspector who will go through and tell you what you need to fix up in the manse, or it will do a walkthrough of your manse with somebody from your congregation to try to highlight what needs to be corrected. This is also true for other church property. If you'd like to see what recommendations there are for fixing your sanctuary, your fellowship hall, whatever else it is, the property committee is happy, as long as we're not in a COVID lockdown at the moment, to walk through with you and look at your building and talk about the things that need to be fixed in it, so that you don't run into insurance problems, so that you don't run into other problems, which again, we've had several congregations that are hitting insurance problems because they haven't kept their buildings up over the years. So please take advantage of that offer from the property committee, if it would be helpful. The chair of that committee this year is Peter Surgener. You can find his contact information in the HRP directory, which you all have access to as clerks of session. And please invite we have on that committee, we have real estate lawyers and real estate agents, just a whole series of different specialties on property who are happy to come and help you figure out what needs to happen there. So that's manses. Any questions, Deb, on that?
I don't see any.
Okay. Then the third thing I want to talk about, because I've gotten a huge number of questions about this, is the required annual sexual harassment training. This went into effect just before we hit COVID. Every employer in New York State is required to provide their employees, and that includes clergy, I'm missing a parentheses there, I apologize, with annual sexual harassment prevention training. all right? It is a requirement. So that means if you have a clergy person, they have to have this training. If you have a sexton or somebody keeping your property, they have to have this training. If you have an office manager, secretary, if you have whoever you have that's in your property who works for you as a church member, as a church employee, must do this training every year. And the training must be interactive. You can't just watch a video. It has to be interactive, either answering questions or having a discussion. It must be consistent with your church's sexual harassment policy. And those of you who are clerks from several years ago will remember we went through how to do those. And it must also include an explanation and examples of what sexual harassment is, as well as your way of redressing any complaints and the process for doing that. So who do they contact? How do they contact them? This is a requirement. The clergy boundary training that we require for pastors every 5 years does not satisfy this requirement. Whose obligation is it to make sure that this training takes place? Want to take a guess why I'm addressing this today? It's the Clerk of Session's obligation. It's not the pastor's obligation to make sure that all of your employees have it. It's the clerk's. So you should be finding a way to make sure that that has happened each year. And you will notice when you had your minutes read that one of the lines I put in there this year is there evidence that this has happened, right? You will see it again next year. It will be in there. You must make sure that it has happened. There are several ways to do that. Most insurance companies have a provision to offer sexual harassment training that you can have your employees do. And they give you a certificate at the end that can be sent to you so that you can show that it's been done. And they can choose, it's about a half an hour to an hour, depending on how fast somebody reads and answers questions that they can do. Another option, New York State itself, if you go to their website, has some PowerPoint slides. You could sit down and talk about the PowerPoint slides along the way. And I think Deb is going to talk about a third option here, which is a service that the Presbytery has contracted for that will give you a way to do this as well. So Deb, I'm going to turn off the PowerPoint for a minute so they can see you if you want to talk about PCR.
Okay, so there are, as Susan said, there's several different ways to access this. The first is through your insurance company. And actually that's what the staff did at the Presbytery. I want to say it took an hour. I don't know, something like that, Susan. It was some reasonable amount of time. But the Presbytery has also gotten a subscription to an organization, PRC, which is it pastoral? They call themselves PRC, Pastoral Resource Center. Practical Resource Center. I couldn't remember what the P stood for. Okay. And the LI stands for Long Island. And you can look in the chat to see how to sign on to that. Because the Presbytery of Long Island used to have a resource center, as we all did. And they turned theirs into an electronic resource center. And I want to tell you that this is an amazing resource for everyone in your church. It has resources that run from Christian education to personnel stuff to small church information, worship, it's just all kinds of things. I would really invite you to visit there, to not pay for anything because the Presbytery has a subscription to it. But one of the more popular items with our churches has been their offering for the New York State requirements for sexual misconduct training. So if you are not able to access your insurance company's information, or if they do not offer it, Church Mutual does offer it. Please check this out. I've had really, really good feedback on the training that their webinar that they offer. At the same time, Susan, a couple questions. Is it just for paid folks or is it for volunteers as well?
So the training is not required for volunteers. Unless you're treating that person as an employee, I suppose you could be a volunteer employee. If the person has a job description and they're they're working for the church, but they're not being paid for it, but they're the office manager, then we're in a blurry line. But otherwise, the answer is it's only employees that have to do this.
And you have a couple hands up. Can you see that?
I can see Donna Restaino, yeah.
I just wanted to check, I mean, I appreciate when the Hudson River Presbytery sends me an email and says, oh, a reminder that annually this training needs to occur. Do you anticipate that we'll still be getting that annual email reminder?
Yes,
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
yes. But I want to make sure that once you get it, you all follow up on it. Yes.
Yes, okay, that's fine.
Pat,
Thank you. Now, all of the jobs in our church are volunteer basis. We don't have any employees through Brook Church. But is this something that we could offer people who might be interested in the congregation? I mean, that's, you know, it might be something, we have, our congregation basically is our church, our clerk is our session and a few other members. So I was thinking maybe we could offer it for everybody that's,
sure. I think you could all register for it. There are a lot of other things on that site that Deb has recommended. There are adult education offerings. There are a great series of different things. And so you may want to look at it as a way to do other educational programs as well, besides the sexual harassment one.
now, the other thing is, if we don't have anybody that would be taking the sexual harassment training, do we put that in our minutes or in our,
You do.
okay,
You would put down, we have no employees, and so it's not required this year for us to do sexual harassment training, have anybody do sexual harassment training. Deb is showing you the series of different things that are there. You'll see sexual harassment prevention training is one of them, but there's worship resources are on how to grow your church, environmental issues, small church resources, etc. And any of the workshops, there are both resources that are already there, and there are workshops that you can choose up at the top of the screen. And any of those you can do free. You put down your church's name. We've given them a list of all the churches. You see when you register there, we've given them a list of all of the churches so that you're more than welcome to do any of these. These are ones that are in real time that you're seeing right now. So, as well as the webinars that are already recorded. So those are all resources that we're hoping you'll use. And we'd like to hear what you think about it. So as you use it, if you think it's a good resource or you thought something wasn't good, let us know, because we've subscribed to it and we want to make sure it's really helping churches. So that's the
Hold on, Susan. We've got some questions in the chat. Can you see the chat at this point?
I get the cursor there. I'm not sure I can.
Okay, hold on. I'll read them to you. Under 18 years old, paid church pianist.
That's an interesting thing. I think still, if they're a paid church pianist on the church property, yes, probably should still do it.
Let's see. Are there provisions for people who might not be able to comprehend the issue of sexual harassment fully?
I'm not sure what that means.
So there's a custodian who's been hired who has intellectual challenges.
I'm not sure if New York has made any provisions for that. That's an interesting question. I've not seen anything on their website that
I haven't either. Yeah.
makes provisions for that. So I would, but that would be a question you'd have to ask New York State, because I just don't see anything there.
Does the session have to take the training?
No, not unless you're an employee.
Pastor is a volunteer, but given a housing stipend.
That's not a volunteer. If it's giving a housing stipend, so they're an employee.
Outside companies,
Outside,
like they're if landscapers, church
no,
maintenance
they
people.
will have to do it, but they will have to do it through their company.
Right.
This is not just churches. All New York State employers are required to have their employees do it. So
How
a
about Paul?
company will have to figure out a way to do it through their company.
How about, these are all really good questions, by the way. How about pulpit supply?
No, Pulpit Supply is not an ongoing employee. They are independent contractors and they do not have to do it.
Okay. Somebody noted that their session is going to do it. Okay, I think that does
Not a
it.
bad thing. I mean, all of us should know what sexual harassment is and how to respond to it in our churches. So it's not a bad thing to have all your sessions do it. But the one thing you will want to do if you do either the PCR webinar or you do the one that's out from your insurance company is make sure that your employees also know how to enforce your policy. So who do they contact? Is it the clerk of session? Is it the pastor? Is it somebody else on personnel? Who is it? So in the presbytery, for instance, in our policy, I have the option, for instance, of contacting Deb or contacting the chair of personnel if I feel like I've been sexually harassed. But I would have to know that. How would I know that? You've got to tell them. Janine, I see your hand up. You're muted. Still muted.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to know for our employees that do take the harassment training, do we need some kind of proof from them that they took it?
You, in either of these cases, if they register through either of the insurance company or the site that Deb just showed you, they will get a certificate at the end that shows that they've done it. They can give you the certificate.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Anything else on that? Okay, then what we're going to do now, let me share my screen again. Is we're going to have a discussion. And Deb will explain a little bit more about this. We have in the last 2 weeks been asking pastors to answer this question. And we thought that it would be good to also hear from clerks of session about it. So I'm going to let you see it. Deb is going to put the question in the chat. And then I'm going to take it down and Deb is going to lead us in a discussion of this. Everybody see it? Okay, there we go.
Okay, thank you, Susan. It's great to be with all of you this afternoon. This was an interesting, very interesting couple of weeks for us. We began the week before last. We held 5 Zooms over 4 days, and they were 2 hours each. They were for pastors who are in pulpits, okay? And we had close to 80% of pastors in the presbytery participate, which is pretty unheard of. So I was pretty grateful for that. The reasoning behind that, what we were trying to do is give pastors an opportunity to talk about 2020, to talk about the changes, to talk about where we were versus where we are today, in hopes that we can see where each other's congregations are falling these days, and to help folks start to think about what is it going to look like as we move forward. Because the one thing that we can count on is it's not going to be the same. Things have changed. Things have changed in a lot of different ways. But most importantly, you've been accessing people in different ways, and we would not want to lose that. I have to say that the pastors were overwhelmingly happy to be there and participatory. I mean, everybody really participated. Generally speaking, we ran out of time. We just didn't have enough time. 2 hours was not enough time. So we talked about 4 separate categories. We could have talked about 8 separate categories, but we were trying to get a sense of, what's going on in the congregation. We talked about worship. We talked about congregational or pastoral care. We talked about programming and mission, and we talked about pastor's self-care, taking care of the pastor's being. When we, and then we came back last week for 2 sessions. The folks came back again for just an hour, and they answered the question that you see on the chat right now. So based on what they had heard and experienced, we wanted to know as a presbytery, how it is that we could resource folks going forward, congregations going forward, as you know, we start to ease into the budget year for 2022, and we start to think about where the resources of the presbytery would be best directed. We had a few themes that we gathered pretty much across the 5 sessions. Now, remember that we divided up congregations based on their general alikeness. So in other words, that usually means size, resources, location, those kind of factors. We tried to do that during that first gathering. So when we talked about worship, one of the things that came up a lot was that folks are feeling pretty darn confident about what they're doing right now after a year and a month of doing something online, recording, Facebook, however congregations are doing this. They're feeling pretty confident about it, but they're really nervous about the next step for most congregations. Some are doing it already, which is probably some form of hybrid worship, right? You don't want to lose the people that you have online or that have been viewing your Facebook or your Zoom offerings. So what does that look like? What does hybrid worship look like? What does coming back into the building actually look like? Now, several of our congregations are back in the building, certainly not at full, anywhere near capacity, but following the restrictions and registration or being outside, or however it is that you all are following the rules and regulations to keep people safe, to keep people that we care about safe. What does coming back all together really look like? What does that even mean? We talked about congregational care. We started out calling it pastoral care. That's the traditional term of when somebody gets sick, they call the pastor. Somebody's sick, you need to go to the hospital and visit people. Well, you couldn't do that, right? So what did that look like? And we got a little bit of pushback on that pastoral care. And it was, it's really become congregational care. And one of the themes that we saw over and over again is that it's not about one person doing this anymore. The congregations really stepped up. I mean, the elders or the deacons really stepped up in trying to keep track of people and how they're doing and what they need and what they're thinking. And if there's anything that they need to be delivered to their houses, is anybody sick? Those kind of things really got sort of housed with everybody during this time. One of the things when we talked about programming and mission is that youth groups and Sunday schools with kids, really challenging over the last few years, the last year and a half. The last thing that kids really wanted was to get back on another Zoom after being on Zoom all day long. And so folks that were trying to do this during this time were very, very challenged. But we heard often that the adult education programs were really successful, that Bible studies have increased. It's easier for people to get into a Bible study. People were coming from all over. People who generally left for the winter to go somewhere else were still joining into the Bible study. So that was really fascinating. Food pantries, and you all that have food pantries know this, are exploding, right? Food pantries are becoming the mission for congregations that either already had them or had to start them up real quickly. So that was something that we heard over and over again. And folks, generally speaking, are pretty grateful for shorter, efficient meetings by Zoom. It's not the perfect thing for sessions. It's not the perfect thing from all groups. But a lot of people over these conversations were pretty happy about having session meetings by Zoom or Christian Ed meetings by Zoom, or it just seems more efficient, and it seems like it what works better for most people. Attendance was definitely up on committees and session meetings. I suspect that we're all going to move into, again, some kind of a hybrid situation with that when we move forward into the next few years. Pastors, overall, it seemed like the better resourced pastors were doing fine. They're pretty much taking care of themselves. They have more family time, again, by virtue of Zoom meetings and more efficient meetings. But pretty much folks are tired. They're really tired. I think you probably understand that yourself. They were very grateful for the different opportunities they have as pastors to join. We still, day one, we started a clergy connection group for pastors that are in pulpits, and it's every Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. And it has gone for every single solitary week and will continue to go every single Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And a lot of people are participating, and they really appreciate that. And they appreciate the ability, maybe like today, of offering Zoom alternatives. So I can't come to this meeting, right? I can't be at this place at this time. But if you can record it and throw it up on the website so that night or the next day, I can take a look at this meeting and see what closing the buildings or hybrid worship on Zoom or food pantry directors, nursery school directors, all the Zooms that are constantly going on. If that's available on the HRP website, they're very grateful for that. Folks seem to be very grateful for that. So anyway, we just wanted to offer you the same opportunity because last week we had everyone back. And again, we asked this question of how Hudson River Presbytery can live into its mission, right? To continually resource congregations. And the only way we can do that is by listening to you. If you have some thoughts or ideas about where you were versus where you're going as a session, as a congregation, we really want to support that. We want to hear it. In those meetings last week, we had representatives from the council were there, representatives from the Committee on Ministry were there. Everyone in leadership needs to hear what congregations are saying as far as how can we resource you going forward in 2022. And so that's what this opportunity is today. So Susan, I think you wanted to just ask for hands. Is that how we're doing this?
Sure. If you have ideas of ways that the presbytery can be of help, would you raise your hand and we'll call on you? And things that would really help your congregation. So I'll use Donna Restaino's comment. Will we send out a reminder each year around the sexual harassment thing? That's a simple little thing. And yes, we were going to do that, but that's the kind of thing it may help. Are there other things we can do that would help your congregation? Simple things like that or more complex things? Donna, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up with, I can't think of anything that you need to do, but I want to just say that I think you guys are doing a great job of getting that information out there. All the meetings that you had on preparing us and all the documents that you had available on reopening and what we needed to do to have everything in place to when we close the doors, when we open the doors. So I think you've been a great source of information. So I would just encourage you to keep giving us that information. I am reading all those emails. I am forwarding that information on to our session. So I applaud for what you have been doing. So thank you.
Anna, that's so nice to hear because we're always balancing that. I can remember one particular week, I think it was the week before last, where everybody on staff wanted to send out an email, right? So we were all trying to balance the idea of having so much information, but yet bombarding you with information, so that you kind of start getting bored with it or used to it. So I appreciate that. We did hear that. We did hear that it's not too much about over information, that we could just keep doing what we're doing as far as that and as far as offering Zooms when it's appropriate. So thank you for that.
In addition, you've changed the newsletter format in which, that's another piece of relevant information that I forward to our session so that they can see what's going on. So,
well, thank you, Donna, because we did do that during the pandemic. We had an opportunity. We actually didn't have the capacity. Once Noel left, we couldn't do the same thing. So we kind of asked around and the council said, you know, if you could just make it short and sweet and to the point, we would love that. And so that's what we're trying to do, is short, sweet, to the point. Click here if you want to see it, or otherwise just ignore it. So yeah, thank you.
I guess I'll give one more final of being last year for the Clerk of Session Day with the minutes review. It felt, you know, a new way of doing this, and a little more chaotic. It just, it felt very natural and easy to do this year. I thought it was a great way. It gave more time to actually review someone's minutes, take that time to actually find where everything was. So I kind of liked it this year.
Good, because I should say right up front, we're going to continue to read minutes electronically at this point. We will have hopefully a face-to-face clerk of session meeting at some point, but we will continue to exchange minutes electronically. It gives everybody a chance to take a glass of whatever their favorite drink is and sit down and read through the minutes and learn about another congregation, which is something we don't have a chance to do much, rather than trying to cram it all into, let me read this in 2 hours and check off all these forms and in a noisy room.
Well, and there's that, Susan, and then there's the idea that, you know, gathering all together in one place, 60 or 70 people, is very unattractive to a lot of people these days. So at number one, number two, where would that happen? Because it's never going to, somebody is always going to be 3 hours away. So it's hard to find that place where everybody can do it. Just this time and energy that we're saving on commuting is really a wonderful thing. However, the trade-off is the personal interactions that we all miss. And that's also it. So I imagine we'll be looking at something hybrid. We'll be looking at something where, as we fine tune our skills of being able to have people just like you all and pastors are doing, to be able to have people live in the room with you at the same time you're monitoring folks on Zoom is something that we have to learn. It's definitely a learning curve for us. I'm imagining our presbytery meetings will be two in person a year, and then the other ones on Zoom. And somehow we have to figure out and change our bylaws so that we can do this hybrid sort of presbytery meeting for those who prefer that. For those who don't want to travel or can't, are working during the day, however that plays out. But we're excited to learn that alongside of your pastors and you.
Thank you.
Nancy.
Oh, I would wanted to piggyback on what the previous young lady was referring to about doing the session review during the year. And I think many clerks here, and I'm not sure how long many of you have been in this, but this was a very new position for me. And I came in during COVID, where things were a little scrambled. One was coming out, getting all the tools, the manuals and everything, which some of them I still haven't received. But I was gifted to have a session minutes review with Astrid and Libby. Astrid Dennison, I believe she's on here, and Libby, I know you're there. And these two young ladies, I mean, they were just phenomenal in support to me. And I was able to learn a lot about their church and how they keep their notes, what things I was missing, things I should have been in. And then even at the end, learning that there was notes that I could put on there. And I had no idea, because the previous clerk is kind of moved on. So it's a lot of information, but it was very worthwhile, the session minute checklist. I enjoyed it.
Great. So you will see that again next year. So as you begin to save your minutes, think about putting them in one file so that you'll have them all ready to go next year. Thank you. Susan. Can't hear you.
This is one of the problems I find with Zoom, but anyway, it's me. I'm sure it's me after a year and a half of Zooming. Like Nancy, I was also brand new to being a clerk during the pandemic, so I have not even known what it's like not to be it in real life. And I appreciate very much all of the communication and everything that's been done. I do want to say that for both last year and this year, I have not reviewed the minutes electronically. I don't want to review them electronically, and I've been able to find other clerks who don't. whether it's through mail last year or actually meeting this year. And I do think it's great if people want to do that, to be able to, and we were one-on-one together, both of us vaccinated, fully vaccinated, meeting and looking at each other's minutes and having really great conversations about it. I feel, and I just need to report this from my session, that we don't understand or don't think we think it's completely out of alignment with the rest of our lives, how the presbytery is holding back on recommending, even small steps forward. Because in our church, we're renting the space out to organizations that are fully using it. So everyone is using the church except the congregation. And I go to work, our school is fully in session, and yet church isn't happening. And as a grandmother whose grandchild hasn't been baptized, and I don't know when she ever will be, because I don't want her baptized by a leaf touching her head, it doesn't feel like, it just doesn't feel like it's coming back in any way. So I just wanted to report that while Zoom might be great for a lot of people, some people are very zoomed out, and some people, I just really don't understand how slowly this is moving from the presbytery as opposed to other organizations. And I hope I don't sound critical. I just
It's not critical. I don't know if you were on the workshop we did last Monday, in which we very clearly made it very clear that it's up to each congregation how they choose to come back.
Oh, great. That was not communicated by our pastor. Love online church.
Some of it, not all of it got recorded, but some of it is actually recorded. I think about 10 minutes of the introductory part. And the documents that you can look at are there. There are criteria to factor in about how far apart you say and
right.
what air goes in and all those kinds of things. And we went through that. One of the things we said at that workshop is each congregation is different in this way. Some of us have very small sanctuaries with very large numbers of people, and it's not going to work to come back and try to crowd 300 people into a sanctuary that at its best barely fits 300. But if you have a large sanctuary and a small number of people, and you can open with, it's really a session by session decision where we are now. Some sessions are meeting out, some congregations are meeting outside, some are meeting face to face, some are still on Zoom or by recorded service. And what we're trying to do is provide you guidelines for your session, who is the ultimate decision maker, to make that decision for your congregation best you can.
Thank you so much. And our session did make decisions, which was great. And we feel very comfortable in following protocols and doing all the right things. I'm not sure we got that message from our particular pastor, but I will be glad to go back and look at that Zoom. Thank you so much.
It's up on the website. So, Libby.
Yes, I just want to quickly add on to what Nancy said. This was my first year doing the minutes review also, but I was fortunate to have Debbie Hill, who was like a 20-year clerk, helping me through it. So it was such a pleasure meeting Nancy. I'm so glad to see you in person. And we worked very well together. We had a number of phone calls, and overall, I thought the process worked well. My only question is, why does Presbytery publish the results with exceptions or without exceptions?
We're required. We are required to.
Oh, okay. By the book of order.
In the same way that I'm required to make sure you file a statistical report.
Okay.
So if the way you have your minutes reviewed, we have our minutes reviewed by the Synod. And if I don't have things that are in there on their checklist, I get it with exception, with exception, with exception.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So
thank
you, Libby. It was wonderful. It really
I agree,
was.
Nancy. Thank you.
Pat.
I'm so glad to hear people say that they had a great time doing the session minutes review, but I'll tell you one thing. I stressed over it until I actually had it and then went through it, and I stressed over reading somebody else's. I am so glad it's done and over with, and I don't look forward to it next year. But as for the fact of the churches being Zoom and hybrid and stuff, we were doing Facebook Live off and on since 2016. So for us, when we came back and started doing Facebook Live again in the sanctuary, it really wasn't an issue. And I know when we we started doing like a hybrid. So we have people in person in the pews, not that many. And we are also doing Facebook Live, and it works out like really well. I don't see any problem with continuing like this. I mean, I don't think there was a question of, are we going to ever stop? Because we started it before the pandemic. And, it seemed like we got a large group that was always viewing, like each week. We're having like 300 or 400 views on our sermons each week, which was great. The thing I did notice is that now that we do a full service, we were just doing like the sermon and from the sermon to the end of the church service. And now that we're doing a full church service, people are more apt to not tune into the beginning part, or, not stay on long enough, or, so I did see that has decreased a little bit. But when we really did our first open service in person on Easter Sunday, that Sunday we had 10 people coming to be baptized, and that was like little kids to adults, which was really amazing. Granted, 5 of them were from the same family, a grandmother and her grandchildren, but it was a great thing. I don't think that we're going to have that much of a problem as we move forward. It seems like as we look at our church, there's enough room to get more people in and to have them socially distance, and everything. So glad that we're open to back up.
Thank you. Susan. Susan Hamlin.
It's a technical question.
Sure.
On the chat, how do I send you a message?
Just me or
anybody? I type it and I don't know where to send it. Sorry.
If you type it at the very bottom, you should see.
Yep.
And you can choose either, we haven't closed the chat, so you can choose everyone, or you can choose to an individual, and then just
right.
And it should
You have to hit return though, Susan.
Yeah, hit the return or the enter button on your computer.
Let's see if it works.
We're all watching.
Did it
We're all
go?
watching. Yeah, we're waiting. We're waiting here.
It has not gone yet.
I'm hitting enter. Oh, maybe it went. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, off topic, everybody. I apologize. That's one of the things that has a lot of people baffled in my group.
Fine. And Zoom has changed some of its settings over the year, and so it's been an interesting journey for all of us.
All right, I'm gonna unmute me.
Other things that would be helpful for us to know that we can, as far as resourcing you all. Okay, I don't see, Deb, are there any other hands up that you're seeing? I don't see any other.
No.
Okay, so I think then what we're going to do is those of you who are more experienced clerks, you're welcome to stay, but otherwise you can leave now.